Hi, my name is Andy Lazur. I'm a water quality specialist with the University of Maryland Extension, and I'm going to talk about what happens with all the rain that we get and does it harm my septic system. So in order to do so, it's important to understand just the basics of how a septic system functions. And then we'll go over some strategies and practices that you can employ at your home to reduce the impact of stormwater on your septic system. Now, a conventional system is a very simple design that works off of physics, gravity, to provide wastewater treatment. And so you have a septic tank that first collects the wastewater from the home, the solids settle, fats, oils, and grease will float, and this is separated from the water that will then go into the distribution box, which then distributes the wastewater evenly to whatever number of trenches that you have. And then that wastewater eventually will filter down, percolate into the ground for filtration. Now, when we look at your home site, it's really important to know where your components are. Where is your septic tank? Where's your distribution box? And where is your drain field? And each septic system is site specific design based on a couple of factors at your site. That includes the number of bedrooms and the types of soils. And in those types of soils, what are the textures? What's the structure? And that influences how well water can infiltrate or percolate into the soil. Then a percolation rate or perk test is done to determine that percolation rate. And then you also need to know what the depth to the water table is, for example, or some other limiting layer that would block infiltration of water horizontally into the soil. And then another key characteristic is site slope and the location of your site. So again, every system is unique to that particular site. And if you don't know where your system is, then you can contact your local health department. Typically, it's the environmental health office, and they may have records of your system, including a site diagram, which would give you a general idea where your system is located. And if they don't have that information, then you would probably want to hire a septic service provider who can come out and actually look for your system and be able to identify the different components for you before you begin any sort of landscaping. Another really important point about septic systems and landscaping plans, developing a plan, is not only knowing where and what type of system you have, but know that that drain field has a life expectancy, averaging about 30 years. And so therefore, once that drain field gets filled up with organic material, what's called biomat, and no longer is able to accept the daily designed flow of wastewater, and therefore the soil gets clogged up and water cannot go down as it should. And in some cases, it either goes up to the surface or slows down your drainage and may even back up into the house. So a drain field does have a life expectancy, and it'll vary depending upon the site conditions and the use, practices, home practices, etc. Some drain fields last many more than 30 years, but then others have failed less than 30 years. Further, that you just don't repair the soil by digging it up and putting in a new drain field. You actually have to go to a new area, and what we call a repair area, kind of a set aside area that you know after your first drain field fails, then you'll have to go to another area on that piece of property and put in a new drain field. There's all types of drain fields, and this is important to know because it can influence the landscaping decisions that you make. We have the gravel trench, we have the chambers here on the bottom, which are essentially similar to a gravel trench. These chambers basically replace the gravel. Here's another type of technology that uses artificial media surrounded by the black corrugated pipe. And again, it's just easier to install And then we have a sand mound here, which again is an elevated system. Typically these are used because there's not an adequate depth of soil for treatment. So therefore they go up. Up here is just a quick shot of a drip tube. Again, these tend to be very shallow based, the upper 6 to 12 inches of soil. So that's important to note. And then there's other types of innovative systems. In this case, this is a peat filter system that basically is placed over gravel. And then that wastewater would percolate through the peat, percolate through the gravel, and down into the soil. But in this case, you have a structure above ground. And so that would be something that you'd have to take into account for your landscaping decisions. This is just a diagram of the basic chemical and biological processes that go on in treating septic tank effluent. It relies mostly on microbes or bacteria, beneficial bacteria that actually convert the nitrogen to different forms, but then also break down the organics and also either outcompete or help the soil, helps the elimination of pathogenic bacteria. Important to note here is that these biological bacterial processes require oxygen. Therefore, your drain field needs to breathe. And so when you're landscaping, you don't want to put anything on top of the drain field that would block that oxygen flow. So what are the issues when you have a lot of rain? Basically, rain creates a barrier for that oxygen to penetrate into your drain field. And not only that, but it puts stress on your system because that added water is infiltrating into the drain field, and therefore the drain field has to accommodate all that extra water, and that may surpass or exceed the daily design, and therefore you may have sluggish drains, for example, or you may have a backup if you have a lot of standing water. So again, this is a big problem. People often ask about snow. Well, snow over a drain field typically isn't as much of a risk in stressing the septic system because it takes a lot of snow to equal 1 inch of rain here. On average, 13 inches of snow equals 1 inch of rain. So, and the other thing about snow is it melts slowly, whereas standing water or heavy rains, that's got to percolate down, pretty quick in order to be moved off the site. So let's just look at a quick example. Here's a typical 3-bedroom home with a septic tank and the drain field. And if we just look at some numbers here, we have a drain field that's 40 feet by 75 feet. Each of those 3 trenches are 70 feet long. So that's 3,000 square feet of drain field. And then let's just say we have a heavy rain. 1 inch of rain equals 1,900 gallons, or actually, that's actually more than the typical 1,500 gallon septic tank. So your drain field is typically designed to accommodate about 150 gallons per day per bedroom. So in this case, that rainwater, just the rain itself, not any runoff, is exceeding the drain field's daily capacity to take water. So that means that the system's going to be very sluggish. Perhaps you may see some water backing up. Certainly, it would influence the ability for you to use your normal amount of water during the day. So what can we do? There's a couple of options here. Swales, diversion swales work fairly well. Surrounding your property or adjacent to the septic system, anything, little depression that will allow the rainwater to channel away from your drain field and septic system. Or you could, instead of going down and having a swale, you could actually go up and create an earthen berm here. And these can be, this one looks like it's probably about almost 2 feet tall. It doesn't need to necessarily be that tall in order to channel water. And here's an example of a landscaped berm to prevent water from coming in this direction and going down the hill. So it reduces the amount of stormwater runoff towards this area of the yard. So again, a couple strategies that can be used. Then you can actually divert water by what's called a French drain. And there's lots of ways to do this using gravel. Some of them are pre-packaged type of thing that has some media surrounding the the corrugated pipe. You can certainly also divert your downspouts into could be a French drain, or it could even be out further away from the house, away from the septic system, and into a swale. Other ways that you can mitigate stormwater around your home is by using rain barrels. This is where the rain water is captured in a barrel from the downspout, and then you can utilize that water as needed to water your plants. Rain gardens is another way, again, to channel rainwater, stormwater into a depression area that's planted. And those plants not only provide habitat, pollinator habitat, but they're also taking up nutrients and taking up water from the rain. There's permeable pavers, which again, instead of having asphalt or concrete where that water will just sheet off, these pavers can actually absorb the water. And then there's permeable concrete or pavement. And again, that just helps reduce the amount of stormwater runoff that's going towards your yard and potentially towards your septic system. So just looking at a diagram and how this might work. So if we have this typical home site and it tends to have a slope in this direction towards the septic system, a couple of options, but a berm here, placed here, could simply just route the water away from the system. You could put a swale in this location or some other configuration. But again, the point is that you would be moving water away from your system. And then another example would be using a French drain system, which you're basically surrounding the drain field with a French drain. And again, that's channeling the water away from the system. How to employ it really depends upon the lay of your land. So you need to understand what the slopes are, where the location of the drain fields are and the slopes, and then look at options as far as how to divert any water away. And again, what you could do even with the French drain is you could route your stormwater from your gutters into the French drain system, and it would carry the water away. Landscaping can be an effective way to mitigate stormwater, certainly. We talked about the rain gardens. Here's just some other examples of how people have landscaped systems. And in the bottom two cases are actually sand mounds that have been landscaped to, again, provide some aesthetic value, some habitat value, but also having that much cover, you're taking up a lot of rainwater and minimizing the amount of water would actually enter the mound or the drain field. So when you're looking at plants, you have a lot of options essentially. Obviously we recommend using native species to your area. They tend to do better, but grasses, turf is an excellent means of covering a drain field, and because you're cutting it grows through most of the season. It's taking up water and nutrients, but again, you have a lot of different options, and a lot of these plants take up a lot of water, so they are a means of mitigating some of your stormwater. And there's different options here. If you have a drier location, this is a list from Maryland Department of Natural Resources that talks about and shows different species that work well in a little bit of a drier setting. And then if you're in a wetter setting, lower elevation, this may be an option. And again, these plants do take up water. And looking at some other tips to minimize stress on your septic system, particularly if you're in a period of a lot of rain, be sure not to add any more water to your system unnecessarily. So if you have any leaks, for example, a leaking toilet, it's amazing how much water is used and actually enters your septic system because it's leaking. So repair those leaks. When it's time to change out appliances, consider using water saving appliances. And then if you're in a rain stressed period, try to reduce your water use and maybe take your laundry and spread it out over several days rather than trying to do it all in one day. That's just going to reduce the amount of water that is being routed to your drain field. Garbage disposals, septic systems do not mix well. And the reason for that is they chop up the solids, and you end up with a lot more organics in the wastewater that enters the drain field. And you don't want that, because you don't want that extra organic material creating a biomat, which is clogging the soil pores. Obviously, don't use chemicals. The typical use of cleaners, bleach is fine, but don't be excessive with that. Certainly don't dispose of any chemicals down the drain. Take those to a recycling center. Another practice that's really important, just to use toilet paper only. Do not use and flush wipes or other things down the system, because that can create clogs. And even if you have a partial clog in your drain field and then you add a lot of rain, that may exceed its capacity to handle that amount of water. Don't drive on the drain field, because it'll compact the soil. It could even break one of the pipes or something. But again, it compacts the soil so where it doesn't percolate quite as well. And then have your tanked every 2 to 5 years. That's probably the most important septic practice that you can do. And what that does is it gets rid of the solids and the fats, oils, and greases to reduce the risk of that going into your drain. So with that, I'll leave you with a whole host of resources. Your local health department is also a great resource for information both on septic systems and wells. So take advantage of those opportunities. Thank you.